What's poppin', my Punishers? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoilers Show, y'all. And if y'all are looking for a breakdown of the 2004 Punisher film starring Thomas Jane as Frank Castle, you have come to the right place. So let's just get into it. The Punisher was directed by Jonathan Hensleigh and was released on April 16th, 2004 with an R rating attached to it, the first comic book film to do so since the first Blade movie 6 years prior. And before making his directorial debut with this Punisher movie, Hensleigh previously worked on the screenplays for 1995's Jumanji, 1997's Die Hard with a Vengeance, and 1998's Armageddon. And helping Hensleigh write the script for The Punisher is Michael France, who wrote 1995's GoldenEye, as well as the 2003 Hulk movie, which is a movie that we broke down here on Heavy Spoilers not too long ago. Check it out. And speaking of the 2003 Hulk movie, before Ang Lee would direct that movie, Jonathan Hensleigh himself was going to write and direct it instead, but that never ended up materializing. And when Jonathan Hensleigh and Michael France were writing the film, they decided to take inspiration from the 1994 Punisher Year One series by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, as well as Garth Ennis's Welcome Back Frank series from the year 2000. And before finally accepting the role as the Punisher, Thomas Jane actually tried his best to not get involved in the superhero scene whatsoever, and actually rejected the Punisher role 2 times. However, Jonathan Hensleigh was determined to get Thomas Jane in the role because he was his first and only choice. Not only this, but Thomas Jane would also apparently reject an offer to play Cyclops in 20th Century Fox's first X-Men film back in the year 2000. But there was one Marvel role that Thomas Jane never even got the opportunity to reject, because back when Universal Pictures was thinking about cooking up some superhero films of their own, director Chris Columbus was actually heavily considering Thomas Jane for the Namor the Submariner film that he was almost going to make, specifically as the Namor villain Tiger Shark, which would have been a wild thing to see, especially if Universal was going to plan on having Namor potentially cross over with Eric Bana's Incredible Hulk, which released only a year before this Punisher film did. And this Punisher movie wasn't exactly what Jonathan Hensleigh originally envisioned. This is mostly because he only got less than half than what he needed to make a more action-packed film. He initially planned for a much more intense film at the cost of $64 million, but he was only given a mere $33 million. And the film would ultimately be met with mostly negative reviews after making $54.7 million. But despite that, Lionsgate was still interested in developing a sequel to the movie. However, director Jonathan Hensleigh and lead actor Thomas Jane would opt out of doing so, leading to Lionsgate deciding to reboot the franchise with the late Ray Stevenson as the lead in 2008's Punisher Warzone. However, Thomas Jane would of course return to the role of Frank Castle for the 2012 fan film Punisher Dirty Laundry, directed by Phil Joannou. But hey, the opposite of Dirty Laundry is clean clothes, and let me tell you, clothes don't get any cleaner than the Heavy Spoilers merch store. We've got new shirts inspired by both Alien and Predator franchises, but if comic books are more your speed, check out our new shirts inspired by Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and Superman. We've got an amazing in-house designer named Sheridan who cooks up only the most fire shirts for you and the nerdy nerds in your life. So hit up the Heavy Spoilers merch store today. To prepare for the role, Thomas Jane decided to put on 20 pounds of pure muscle. Dude apparently worked out twice a day for 2 hours every single day and drank only protein shakes and shit. And not only this, but he decided to link up with the US Navy SEALs and train with them for 7 months. But all that aside, the movie opens with a wide shot of Tampa, Florida. The production considered shooting the movie in a number of different locations before ultimately deciding on Tampa. Locations like New Orleans, Louisiana, Biloxi, Mississippi, Galveston, Texas, and Mobile, Alabama. Rolling up in a yellow 2000 Chevrolet Corvette C5 is Bobby Saint, the son of crime lord Howard Saint, played by James Carpinello, who also plays his older brother John later in the movie. Along with Bobby Saint is Mickey Duca, played by Eddie Jameson. The character of Mickey Duca is heavily inspired by the character Mickey Fondozzi, who made his first appearance in 1992's The Punisher Warzone. Fondozzi worked for the Carboni crime family in Brooklyn before the Punisher would spare his life and turn him into his secret inside informant, much like we see the Punisher do with Mickey Duca and the Saint family in this movie. Bobby and Mickey then meet up with an arms dealer by the name of Otto Krieg, with the hopes of buying some Heckler & Koch, the G36Cs off of him. And even though this dude is Frank Castle himself in a blonde wig, Mickey doesn't know this and assures a sketched out Bobby that this Otto Krieg guy is the real deal, saying that Krieg has the ability to speak Russian, German, and Arabic. Later on in the movie, when Howard Saint gets a look at Frank Castle's files, we can see that Frank Castle was recommended by the Special Activities Center because he had the military experience to craft the Otto Krieg persona, one that was apparently heavily based on various contacts that Castle has worked with around the world. According to those files, Otto Krieg is a German national from a low-income neighborhood. With the assistance of German authorities, we have doctored false documents to include German passports, driver's licenses, school records, and a brief stint in the German army. The purpose of this persona is to give him the background to carry out the role of an arms dealer. And what's kind of funny about this disguise is how actor Thomas Jane actually has blonde hair in real life. So he had to dye his hair black for the movie, only to have to wear a blonde wig for the Otto Krieg persona anyway. Not sure why they didn't just dye his hair after they shot this scene, but hey, I'm not a movie producer. Yet. When Bobby and Mickey agree to purchase the guns from Otto, the FBI suddenly show up to crash the party. Unfortunately, things would go awry when Howard Saint's son Bobby gets Swiss cheesed and dies on the scene. Otto Krieg and his associates get shot up by the FBI as well, but their bullets were fake, part of an act so that the Saint family wouldn't find out that the entire operation was an FBI sting. When the ambulance brings both Frank and Bobby's bodies to the FBI's secret location, I love how Frank rises from his body bag like a zombie rising from the grave, mostly because dying and being resurrected would end up being a major theme for Frank Castle in this movie with his Punisher identity. So that movement kind of foreshadows Frank's overall rebirth. Frank is then immediately greeted by a surprise party celebrating his retirement from undercover work with the FBI. FBI agent Jimmy Weeks, played by Russell Andrews, says that Frank is the finest soldier that he ever knew, referencing Frank Castle's past in the Delta Force during the Gulf War. This differs from the original comics, which had Frank Castle as a Vietnam War veteran. But those comics are of course much older, so they had to modernize it for this newer version of Frank Castle. Not long after this, we are brought to the estate of Howard Saint, played by actor John Travolta. Former NBA player Matt Geiger allowed the production to use his mansion as the Saint family home for the movie, which was quite nice. Bobby's older twin brother John tells his parents about Bobby's demise, causing his mother Livia, played by actress Laura Herring, to collapse to the ground in grief. John then orders that Mickey be bailed out before he's brought to the Saint family nightclub by the name of Saints and Sinners, a super clever name based on the Saint family name, with the Sinners, of course, being the club goers in attendance. We can also see that the logo for the nightclub is a red halo, with the halo representing the Saint theme and the red representing the Sinners theme. Quentin Glass, played by Will Patton, beats Mickey repeatedly as Mickey begs for mercy, but then Howard emerges and decides to kill Bobby's bodyguard instead, blaming him for his tragic loss. Having this action be the very first thing that Howard does in this movie is a great way to showcase Howard's rash and hot-headed tendencies when he gets over-emotional, the character trait that would usher in his own downfall, as it would make him an easily manipulated target for the Punisher later on in the movie, leading him to murder his own wife and best friend. We then transition to the Castle family household as they prepare for a big move to London, England, so that the Castle family could lie low after Frank's career as an undercover operative. And while helping the movers out, Frank's wife Maria, played by actress Samantha Mathis, grabs a family photo sitting atop a newspaper. And though we can't exactly see what the headline of the newspaper is, we can see that Florida State University is mentioned on the front page, further establishing the film's Florida setting. Frank then arrives home and embraces his wife in celebration of his last job ever as a government operative. However, his only child William doesn't believe that Frank's done with this line of work that causes him to move all of the damn time. William mentions how the Castle family previously lived in California before moving to Virginia to work in Washington, D.C. However, his work at Washington would of course force the Castle family to relocate to Florida so that Castle could pretend to be Otto Krieg for a while to catch some bad guys. In the comics, Frank's son is actually named Frank Castle Jr., who was born a few years after his older sister Lisa. But for this movie, they would only give Frank just the one child. Later on in the film, Frank and his wife Maria would talk about having another child, a possible allusion towards comic Frank Castle's daughter. Frank's family then take a trip to Aguadilla Bay, Puerto Rico, for a Castle family reunion at the home of Frank Castle's father, Frank Castle Sr., played by actor Roy Scheider, who was cast in this movie primarily because he lived in the same neighborhood as the director. The location of Frank Castle Sr.'s Puerto Rican house party is actually just a repurposed restroom area at Honeymoon Island State Park in Dunedin, Florida. Frank and his son William swim at the local docks in the same location that William and his mother would be slain in the not too distant future. Frank then mentions to his family that his son could swim as well as a Navy SEAL, referencing Frank's past experience as a Marine. The family then noticed the local witch doctor named Manuel Candelaria, who would later find Frank Castle's wounded body and nurse him back from death's door with his witch doctory type abilities. Later that night, Frank, Maria, and William all dress in white as they celebrate with their family before the movie transitions to the same family dressed in black for Bobby's funeral. A great little contrast there. Howard Saint is then handed Frank Castle's file, where he learns that Otto Krieg and Frank Castle are one and the same. Howard then orders Frank's execution before Howard's wife Livia orders that Frank's entire family be massacred as well. One could say that Livia was motivated by pure petty vengeance, but part of me wonders if Livia was just attempting to spare Frank's family the pain of having lost Frank in her own twisted way, considering that she herself was dealing with the unbearable loss of her son. But maybe it was a little bit of both. I don't know. Either way, bitch was crazy. The following day, William gives his father a black t-shirt with a skull on it after he was told that skull would help the wearer ward off evil spirits. But little did little Willie know that a whole squad of evil spirits were on their way to really mess up their day. The Punisher skull logo in this movie is stylized in a much more grungy way than we see in the comic books. And this is in direct response to the feedback that this movie production received after the first teaser trailer was released. Because even though the logo they used for that teaser was comic book accurate, people thought that the design didn't fit the overall tone of the film, which led the production to change things up with the new design. And when the goons finally arrive, they decide to eliminate Frank's mother first out of everybody at the function, with part of me feeling that this was a deliberate decision as it was Bobby's mother Livia that ordered the hit on the Castle family in the first place. So killing Frank Castle's mother first was kind of appropriate, in an inappropriate way. Frank Castle Sr. then grabs two Savage Stevens 311A shotguns for him and his son, and the two of them begin defending the castle. Unfortunately, Frank Castle Sr. would be murdered along with the rest of Frank's family right before the goons chase after Maria and William Castle as they attempt to drive away in a blue 1999 Ford E350. And in order to save his wife and son, Frank hops on a Triumph Bonneville 800 bike and chases after them. The production made sure to make Frank's time on a bike super brief because the director really wanted to separate his iteration of the Punisher from the less than well-received Dolph Lundgren Punisher from 1989, who also rode on a motorcycle himself. And if you guys want a breakdown of that 1989 Punisher film, look no further than the Heavy Spoilers channel because I broke that down not too long ago. But yeah, this is the main reason why Frank mainly rides in a custom Pontiac GTO. But as fast as Frank could ride, he could not reach his wife and son in time before they became roadkill. The death of Frank's family happens a lot differently in the comics, as they are famously gunned down in New York City's Central Park after they witness a gang-related murder there. And as Frank holds his family in his arms, we can see that his thumb is looking kind of weird looking and gray here. And the reason for this is due to actor Thomas Jane getting his thumb stuck in a door in real life, causing his thumb to look all super messed up. Frank then fires a Ted Williams Model 21 deluxe sawed-off shotgun that he picked up off of one of the goons to avenge his family, but is immediately shot multiple times. However, instead of just popping him in the head to make sure that he was dead, these dinguses decided to blow Frank up with a gasoline explosion. But luckily, Frank's body would be launched into the ocean to be picked up and patched up by Frank's witch doctor acquaintance Manuel, who wasn't too far away on a nearby island. And not long after the massacre, Howard and Livia Saint head to their club, where Mickey now serves as a chauffeur. Mickey then has a newspaper shoved into his chest, which details the events of the Castle family's gruesome demise. And in that article, we also learn that poor little Willie Castle was only 10 years old when he was converted into a living speed bump, which is kind of a speed bummer if you ask me. And while they're in the club, Howard orders that Quentin dance with his wife as he talks business with his goons. And he does this primarily because he has been growing suspicious of his wife's close connection with his right-hand man and wanted to study their interactions. And as he watches them dance, the words, "Are these feelings from my intuition, or are they just the voice of suspicion?" from the song Jealous One by J.C. Loader plays in the background, reflecting Howard Saint's own inner thoughts. And a little while after the dance, Howard gives his wife a pair of diamond earrings. But these aren't fake diamond earrings made for the movie, these are actual Harry Winston diamonds, which apparently are worth $1 million, which is nuts. And after this handy manny patches Frank up and brings him back to his father's abandoned house, Frank grabs his father's customized twin Colt M1911A1s, which were sitting next to a Colt SAA, as well as a Lamat 1861 and Colt 1851 Navy percussion revolvers. Frank then heads outside and finds the shirt that his son bought for him with the Punisher's skull logo on it. He then looks into the camera and says, "Time to become the Punisher from Punisher 2004, before Manuel tells him to go with God. But Frank replies to Manuel by telling him that God is going to sit this one out. And probably because God went on Rotten Tomatoes and saw that 29% next to that green splat and didn't want to waste his time. But to be fair, I kind of feel like 29% is a little bit harsh because this movie really isn't all that bad. It kind of feels like an 80s action film shot in the early 2000s, and I kind of dig it. Frank then gets himself an apartment before loading that apartment up with various weapons, including a suppressed Heckler & Koch MK23 Mod 0 pistol, a Glock 17, and an RM Equipment M203PI grenade launcher. Frank also installed a Smith & Wesson Model 66 revolver inside of a hidden drawer that pops out when Frank knocks around it. And because Frank is extra efficient, he even stuck an M67 baseball hand grenade right under his own bathroom sink. You know, just in case a massive Russian guy, played by wrestler Kevin Nash, ever breaks into his apartment to kick his ass for some cash. And we can't forget to mention the M181A1 Claymore that Frank would use to blow up a boat full of money a little bit later on in the movie. Frank's next door neighbors then start getting curious as to what this weirdo does all day, especially after watching him modify his Pontiac GTO with bulletproof window shielding. His hot neighbor Joan is played by actress Rebecca Romijn in her second Marvel role after playing the shape-shifting Mystique in 2000's X-Men and 2003's X2 X-Men United. And his slightly less hotter neighbors include the enthusiastic cook Nathaniel Bumpo, played by stand-up comedian John Panette, as well as Dave, played by Ben Foster, who would go on to play Angel in 2006's X-Men The Last Stand. Joan, Bumpo, and Dave are all characters that originate from issue number 1 of Garth Ennis's Welcome Back Frank Punisher storyline from the year 2000. And because comic book Dave had a face covered in piercings, actor Ben Foster decided to go the extra mile and actually pierce his face for extra comic book accuracy, which is some serious dedication to the role. Joan's comic book counterpart had the nickname Joan the Mouse, mostly because she was a super quiet and introverted lady. In issue 7 of that very same run, Joan and Dave would find Frank pretty badly wounded in his apartment, a lot like we see later on in this movie. But unlike in this movie, Joan has no romantic affections for Frank in the comics. But later that night, Frank Castle goes out and kidnaps Mickey in order to squeeze some information on Saint's operations. This popsicle torture scene was taken directly from the pages of 1992's Punisher Warzone #1. In that issue, the Punisher does the exact same thing that we see in this movie and dangles a mobster named Mickey Fondozzi upside down while pressing a popsicle on his back and blowtorching a slab of meat. He even shoves the popsicle in Mickey's mouth when he's finished, just like we see Thomas Jane do in this movie. I love when comic book panels are brought to life like this. Mickey then caves and tells Frank all about the Saint family's operations, including their money-moving deal with the Toro brothers. And when Mickey is specifically telling Frank about the movements of Howard's son John, we see John exiting the 2001 Odyssey Gentlemen's Club, a real club in Tampa, Florida, named after Kubrick's 1968 classic, 2001: A Space Odyssey. After convincing Mickey to become his loyal informant, Frank then decides to head to the burial site of his family. And before he yanks his own tombstone from the ground, we can see a bit of a movie error on the screen. Because on Little Willie's tombstone, it says that he was born in the year 1995 before dying in the year 2003. This would make William 8 years old as opposed to the 10-year-old that was reported in the newspaper handed to Mickey earlier in the film. Frank and his wife, on the other hand, were apparently born in the year 1968, making Maria 35 years old when she was gunned down. Frank then drops off his old tombstone at Saint's golf course before telling off his old FBI buddies for not doing enough to avenge his family's death. Then an extremely upset Frank heads to one of Saint's facilities with a Mossberg 590 compact cruiser shoddy. He then threatens Saint's employees and forces them to toss all the money that they were holding out the damn window onto the pedestrians below. And as everyone is scrambling to get a piece of free money, Frank appears inside of the lobby of the building, accompanied by the sound of a funeral church bell in the background. A nice touch that truly helps Frank feel like a true harbinger of death. We would hear this same bell sound at the very end of the movie when Frank is confronting Howard in the parking lot. Then Frank and two of the Saints' goons have themselves an old-fashioned cowboy standoff, just like the kind that we see in the 1966 classic, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Apparently that movie was a source of major creative inspiration for director Jonathan Hensleigh when crafting this movie. Other movies that inspire this production include 1967's Bonnie and Clyde, as well as 1972's The Getaway. Unlike in the previous Punisher film from 1989, this version of Frank Castle decides to go 100% solo. Dolph Lundgren's Frank Castle had the help of his alcoholic informant Shake, played by actor Barry Otto, and the Punisher in the comics typically has a helpful computer man in the chair by the name of David Linus Lieberman, aka Microchip, or simply Micro. However, Jonathan Hensleigh apparently hated the Micro character from the comics so much that he deliberately excluded Micro from this movie by writing his ass out. Kinda wild. We would of course not see the Micro character done in live action until actor Wayne Knight would portray Micro in 2008's Punisher Warzone. But yeah, after Frank guns the goons down, Dave and Bumpo watch the news story on a TV. Bumpo is seen eating a slice of pizza while doing so, much like the comic book Bumpo is seen doing in this panel from 2000's Punisher number 11. And later that night, while Frank is drinking, he has flashes of the traumatic day that his family was gunned down. And in one of those flashes, we can see how the bullet that hit Frank in the chest was just barely below his heart, allowing him to actually survive. Sometime later, Howard Saint has a meeting with his boys discussing why Frank Castle survived. Howard theorizes that Frank was only still alive just to suffer even more than he already has. However, right after Howard says this, we get a shot of this painting of this figure surrounded by flames in the background, foreshadowing how Howard Saint himself would suffer surrounded by flames by movie's end. The following morning, Howard gets a visit from the very upset Toro brothers who want compensation for the $50 million that Frank gave away to charity. And in order to ensure that the Toro brothers' next shipment of cash gets delivered safely, Howard hires a hitman from Memphis to eliminate their Punisher problem. Meanwhile, that night, one of Joan's asshole ex-boyfriends enters the apartment looking to do Joan harm. But Frank would of course show up, steal his Benchmade Model 42 Balisong butterfly knife before beating his ass off of the premises. Using Mickey's intel, Frank then goes out and begins to plant the seeds of an affair between Livia and Quentin by stealing Livia's car when she's at the movies every Thursday just to leave it outside a hotel and gather weekly parking tickets. Frank would then blackmail Quentin by threatening to expose his sexuality and force him to repeatedly show up at the hotel during those same nights, which would of course eventually successfully lead Howard to assuming that Livia and Quentin were having weekly hotel bang sessions on the regs. And in order to ensure that nobody would park in Livia's parking space while he was gone, Frank places a fake fire hydrant in front of it. This little trick was included in the movie by director Jonathan Hensley because he had a friend who was able to park their car illegally for 2 whole years by placing a fake fire hydrant to keep his personal parking spot available to him at all times. You gotta love a good unethical life hack. The following day, Frank decides to grab a bite at the diner that Joan works at before he's visited by Howard's assassin from Memphis, Mr. Harry Heck, played by country music singer Mark Colley. Harry Heck Thornton was first introduced in the pages of March 2000's Punisher #2 by Garth Ennis. In that issue, Harry Heck is introduced as a redneck hitman from Arkansas hired by the Nucci crime family to eliminate the Punisher. However, even though Harry was known as one of the very best pistol fighters in the game, the Punisher would quickly dispose of Harry before he even got a chance to prepare. So this movie has a much more fleshed out version of the Harry Heck character for damn sure. And like I mentioned before, the character's full name in the comics is Harry Heck Thornton. However, this movie would elect to drop the Thornton part so that people wouldn't confuse this character with actor Billy Bob Thornton. Not sure how people would get those two characters confused, but I don't know. Hollywood be doing some random shit sometimes. And after threatening Frank with a song on his guitar, he waits for Frank to leave the diner and pull up to a train crossing. And as Frank pulls up, we can see that Frank's license plate has the words Year One written on it, a slight nod towards the Punisher Year One story from the comics that inspired some of this film. However, the main reason why the words Year One are written there in the first place is because Year One is the name of the place that supplied the parts for the movie's custom Pontiac GTO. Well, I should say 5 custom Pontiac GTOs because they built 5 of them specifically for this production. Harry then begins shooting at Frank's car from his diarrhea green 1968 Plymouth Satellite 2-door hardtop. Frank accidentally flips his car trying to escape and has to crawl out from the wreckage. But just when Harry is about to send Frank to heck, Frank whips out the mouse tool of the day in the form of his handy-dandy spring-loaded knife, using that knife to long-distance stab Harry in his heckin' throat the way that God intended. This knife moment is a clear nod to issue 8 of Garth Ennis's Punisher from 2000, as the Punisher uses a spring-loaded knife to kill someone in that Welcome Back Frank story as well. In retaliation, Frank destroys yet another one of the Toro brothers' money shipments, further threatening Saint's relationship with them, leading Howard to hire a new assassin to send after Frank. Frank is then tricked into having dinner with Joan, Dave, and Bumpo. Joan from the comics also used food to try to socialize with Frank, like we see here in the pages of 2000's Punisher #2. Joan then tries to make a move on Frank. However, Frank's long-term relationship with the bottle of Wild Turkey bourbon in his apartment keeps him from getting laid. But luckily for Frank, he would still get a surprise late-night visit in the form of the assassin known as the Russian, played by wrestler Kevin Nash. This entire fight sequence against this Russian assassin took the production a full 2 days to film. The Russian's outfit in this movie is accurate to the comics when the character first appeared in 2000's Punisher #8. And because of his striped outfit, the Punisher's tussle with the Russian was known as the Horrific Clown Show on set, because he straight up looks like a jacked clown. And to defend himself, Frank uses the butterfly knife that he stole earlier on the Russian, stabbing him in the shoulder. However, this stabbing was actually 100% authentic, as Thomas Jane straight up stabbed Kevin Nash. Apparently, the prop guy on the set messed up big time and forgot to replace the Punisher's real knife with a fake one. But apparently Kevin Nash was super cool about it and only wanted a few beers from the production to make up for his troubles. What a badass, man. The Russian's death happens a lot differently in the comics. In fact, it would be Mr. Bumpo himself that would be responsible for his demise, because after Frank throws a scalding hot pizza onto the Russian's face, he would then use Mr. Bumpo's large, pillow-like body to suffocate the Russian, which is kind of hilarious. But in this movie, the Russian merely breaks his neck after having his face burned by Mr. Bumpo's hot oil. If director Jonathan Hensley got his way, we would all have watched blood ooze out of the Russian's eyes right after all that hot oil was splashed on him. However, the Motion Picture Association are a bunch of babies and thought that that moment was a little bit too gruesome, so they had to cut it out. And even though the Punisher won this fight, he was still pretty badly wounded. Joan then attempts to stitch up Frank's knife wound, but apparently, actress Rebecca Romijn would actually hurt Thomas Jane in the process by accidentally stitching a piece of his skin. But like homegirl shoved that needle in way too deep and went past the prosthetic part of the injury and got Thomas Jane pretty good. But that's what he gets for stabbing Kevin Nash in the shoulder. With Saint's goons not too far away, Joan is then forced to hide Frank in a hidden elevator. And when Quentin arrives, he questions Dave about the Punisher's whereabouts, eventually resorting to torture to try to get the intel out of him. But because Dave is a real one, he doesn't say shit, leading to him getting all of his facial piercings ripped out one by one, which is kind of gnarly, man. This torture scene is straight out of the pages of 2000's Punisher number 8, which also has a Dave being tortured for information about the Punisher's whereabouts. After a long and fruitless torture session, Quentin and most of his boys leave the apartment with absolutely nothing. Frank then emerges from the hidden elevator like a man rising from the grave, continuing this dead man theme. And with one of Saint's men still lingering at the apartment, Frank decides to embed a paper cutter into his skull. And there was actually originally going to be a much closer shot of this goon's head getting hacked by this paper cutter, but again, the Motion Picture Association forced them to remove that shot from the movie because it looked too real. After this, Frank Castle prepares his final assault on the Saint and Sinners nightclub, and as he does, a narration of Frank's intent plays in the background, a narration that Frank states is the start of a journal, a clear nod to the Punisher War Journal series by Carl Potts and Jim Lee that ran from 1988 to 1995. Meanwhile, Howard takes the bait and is now fully convinced that his wife is cheating on him with his right-hand man, Quentin Glass, especially after finding his wife's $1 million earrings in his bedroom. In a fit of rage, Howard then stabs his best friend in his own home, killing him. And fun fact, but this night murder scene was actually filmed in the middle of the day. But they made it look like as if it was nighttime by covering the entire house in a sunlight-resistant tent. And because he's still in a murdery mood, Howard then decides to immediately go and kill his wife as well by tossing her ass off of a bridge in front of an oncoming train. In the actual script for the movie, Livia actually voluntarily throws herself off of the bridge rather than Howard being the one to do it. But they decided to switch things up in order to make Howard look even more deranged. Frank then grabs his father's trusty 1911 Colts along with a Colt M4A1 carbine with an M203 40mm grenade launcher attachment and a couple of mines and completely decimates everybody in the Saints and Sinners nightclub. At one point, a huge explosion goes off in front of the club as well, an explosion that caused a ton of bystanders to blow up their local police department with concerned calls. Apparently, the production did a really poor job at letting people know that a huge explosion was about to go down for a movie, which is especially irresponsible considering how the September 11th terrorist attacks were only 3 short years earlier, so everyone in America was still very much on edge. Frank then tells Howard that he got totally pranked into killing everyone that he loves the most before attaching Howard Saint to the back of a car and ghost riding his ass straight to hell where he belongs. And even though these parking lot explosions do make the Punisher symbol in an extremely cheesy manner, I kind of really enjoyed that moment. I don't know. Like, it's kind of funny to think that Frank spent like an hour or two planning on how to make the perfect skull that only a helicopter could appreciate. And with his family now avenged, Frank contemplates ending it all in his apartment, but remembers Joan's words about living to make good memories. So, to reward Joan and her neighbors for their kindness, Frank decides to leave behind stacks of the Saints' money for them in his empty apartment after he moves out. A moment taken straight from the pages of 2000's Punisher number 12. Then the movie ends with the Punisher vowing to punish those who break the law and hurt other people while standing on Tampa's Sunshine Skyway Bridge. This is significant because this bridge is famously known to be a hotspot for people who have given up on life, if you know what I mean. So Frank standing there with his newfound determination to live is especially symbolic and appropriate. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of the 2004 Punisher film. Let us know what you guys thought of this movie in the comments section down below. Like always, you can follow me at MasterTainment on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Blue Sky, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoy the video. But like always, I've been MT. You guys have been amazing, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.